was the end of a decade, and it felt like the end of a country. The 1990s in Russia were a time of chaos, a wild, lawless experiment. The Soviet Empire had vanished, and in its place was a vacuum, a weak state, a humiliated people, and a handful of billionaires who had swallowed its wealth. The world wondered if Russia would disintegrate entirely. And then, from the shadows of a former intelligence service, emerged a man nobody saw coming.
В аэропорту, значит, вы уж меня извините, в туалете поймаем, мы и в сортире их замочим, в конце концов. Все, вопрос закрыт.
His name was Vladimir Putin, and he was about to make a promise to end the revolution. The story begins not in the halls of power, but in a cramped communal apartment in a city still scarred by a devastating siege, Leningrad. Vladimir Putin was a tough, wiry child from a working-class family. He was not a star student, but he was fiercely determined, with a penchant for street fights and the Soviet martial art of Sambo. As a teenager, he was captivated by a book and a film glamorizing the work of Soviet intelligence. It was then, in the dim light of a Leningrad cinema, that a singular ambition crystallized. He would join the KGB. It wasn't just a career choice. It was a path to respect, power, and a defined role in a defined world. The moment that changed his life was a visit, as a 16-year-old, to the KGB's personnel office. He walked through the heavy, official doors, the air smelling of old paper and bureaucracy. He was just a boy, but he walked directly to a clerk and stated his ambition. The official's reply was curt, a dose of cold reality. "We don't take people who come in off the street." But then, the crucial caveat: "We hire after Army service or graduation from a civilian higher education institution, preferably a law department." In that sterile office, Putin received his first and most important mission. The stakes for young Vladimir were personal: escape the poverty and obscurity of his childhood. The consequence of that brief meeting was a relentless focus. He transformed from a brawler into a disciplined student, enrolling in Leningrad State University's law faculty with one goal in mind. He was no longer just a boy from Leningrad. He was a candidate. By the 1980s, he had achieved his dream. KGB officer Vladimir Putin was stationed in Dresden, East Germany. It was a backwater post, but it was here, far from the centers of power, that he would witness the event that would define his entire worldview: the collapse of the Soviet Empire. In 1989, the world turned upside down. The Berlin Wall fell. Protests erupted in Dresden. A mob gathered outside the KGB villa demanding to storm the building and burn its archives. Putin, the junior officer, was the one who had to call the local Soviet military command for backup. The response was a deafening silence. "We cannot do anything without orders from Moscow, and Moscow is silent," the voice on the line said. Standing alone before the angry, chanting crowd, he could feel the utter impotence of the superpower he served. The air was electric with revolutionary fervor and the smell of smoke. He had to bluff, telling the protesters that his men were armed and would shoot to kill if they crossed the line. It was a hollow threat. In that moment, he saw with brutal clarity that a superpower that would not defend its own interests was doomed. The lesson was seared into him. Strength is everything. Weakness is an invitation to be destroyed. The consequence of this humiliation was a personal and political trauma. He returned to a Leningrad that was becoming St. Petersburg, to a country that was disintegrating. The KGB, his beloved institution, was in disgrace. The stable, powerful world he had signed up for had vanished. He was now a man without a country, a spy without a cause, adrift in the very chaos he would later pledge to destroy. His salvation came from an unlikely source. His former law professor, Anatoly Sobchak, now the charismatic mayor of St. Petersburg, offered him a job. Putin resigned from the KGB and entered the chaotic world of Russian politics. His title was important. His role was everything. He became Sobchak's fixer, the man behind the desk who made things happen. While Sobchak was the public face of reform, Putin was the one managing the city's finances, its food supplies, and its deals with shadowy foreign investors. He operated in the gray zone where politics, business, and the emerging criminal underworld met. He learned the levers of power, not from a grand office, but from a cramped one. He saw how the new Russia really worked. During this time, a food shortage crisis threatened the city. Putin was tasked with securing supplies. He set up a barter system, raw materials for food. The deals were complex, murky, and involved characters with questionable backgrounds. He spent hours in smoke-filled rooms, the scent of cheap tobacco and anxiety thick in the air, negotiating with men who saw the state not as an authority, but as a prize to be looted. He saw the weakness of the new Russian democracy firsthand. It was corrupt, inefficient, and vulnerable to predators. The stakes were the survival of his city and his own political future. The consequence was his forging a new identity, not a KGB ideologue, but a pragmatic Silovik, a man from the security services who believed that only a strong, centralized state could bring order to this chaos. He built a network of loyal allies, men from the KGB and the military, who shared his disdain for the disorder of the 1990s. He was building his team. In 1996, he moved to Moscow. The country was being run into the ground by Boris Yeltsin. The president was ailing, his administration was a byword for corruption, and he was desperately searching for a successor. Someone loyal, someone who could protect him and his family from prosecution after he left office. He needed an heir, but what he needed more was a protector. Putin, the quiet, efficient, and utterly loyal official, was perfect. He was a gray man in a world of colorful oligarchs. He didn't seek the spotlight, he controlled the shadows. In a stunningly short period, he was promoted through the most powerful offices in the land. In August of 1999, Yeltsin made his final and fateful gamble. He appointed the unknown, uncharismatic Vladimir Putin as Prime Minister of Russia. Just weeks after his appointment, a series of apartment bombings rocked Russian cities, killing hundreds. The air was thick with panic and the acrid smell of rubble. The government blamed Chechen terrorists. Putin's response was swift, brutal, and televised.
В аэропорту, значит, вы уж меня извините, в туалете поймаем, мы и в сортире их замочим, в конце концов. Все, вопрос закрыт.
He promised to waste them in the outhouse. He launched a new war in Chechnya. The Russian public, terrified and thirsting for revenge, saw in Putin what they had not seen in years: resolve, strength, and a promise of order. The consequence was an immediate and massive surge in Putin's popularity. The war, for all its horror, was a political masterpiece. It created a unifying national enemy and defined his brand. The unknown bureaucrat was now the strong leader Russia craved.